Video number 22, the features of science. Science. Science is not a body of knowledge. Science is not a list of facts. Science is a way of finding stuff out. Science is a toolkit for exploring the world. It's a way of finding things out that has worked pretty well, and science might not be the best way of finding things out. Science might not be the best way of seeking after truth, but since people started using science, it has had some pretty good successes, and over the years people have really come to trust science as a good way of seeking after the truth about the universe. Okay, so this video is about the features of science. What makes science science, and is psychology scientific or not? Okay, the first feature of science that we want to look at is empiricism. Empiricism is a method of investigation that relies upon direct observation and testing, and we can illustrate that with these two pictures. On the left here we've got rationalism, and this is the view that we can just figure out the truth on our own, that we can just think things through, and through logic and rational argument and discussion we can arrive at the truth just through the power of thought alone. On the right hand side we've got empiricism, and empiricism is the view that knowledge should be gained through the senses, by looking at stuff and observing it, and by experiment. And science should be empirical, and psychology strives to be empirical and strives to be more scientific in that regard. That's why psychology uses observations and lab experiments rather than relying upon hearsay and logic. That brings us on to the next thing that we need to look at: objectivity. Something is objective if it's not affected by expectations or bias. Is it possible to agree on the facts? So this pencil, for example, it's blue. Now if you were in the room you would also be able to see that it's a blue pencil, dark blue, and we can agree on that, and frankly anyone who wasn't colourblind could look at this pencil and say that it's blue. That's an objective fact. Now, is it a nice pencil? Is it a good pencil? Well, we could easily disagree about that, because that's a subjective question which includes our opinion. Is it blue or not? That's not up for discussion. That's not a matter of opinion. Is it a nice pencil? Well, we could talk all day about that. That is why in psychology we use double and single blind observation techniques to try to remove bias and expectation and subjective opinion out of the equation, and why in psychology we try as far as possible to rely upon empirical methods, because empirical methods are more objective and more scientific. Replicability is the repeatability of a procedure or the outcome of an investigation. Two very closely related meanings. So procedural replicability is the idea that if I can take someone's journal article and I can read the method, the procedure, and if just from that I can then do exactly the same experiment or investigation with no variation whatsoever, getting it exactly the same as what they did, then that's a replicable procedure. If I then get the same result as they did, if the outcome of the experiment or the investigation is the same, then that's a replicable result. So replicability is very, very closely related to the concept of reliability, but it's not quite the same thing. Falsifiability. Falsifiability is the possibility that a statement or hypothesis can be proven wrong. It's disprovability. If a hypothesis is not falsifiable, if it's not disprovable, then it's no good. The person who came up with this idea is called Karl Popper, and he said that you can never prove a hypothesis to be true. All swans are white. That's a hypothesis, isn't it? And it's a hypothesis that makes a prediction. It predicts that if I go down to Tooting Common and I observe the swans there, then all I'm going to see is white swans. Okay, so let's go down to Tooting Common and observe some swans, and supposing I spend the afternoon there and observe lots of swans and they're all white, does that prove my hypothesis to be true? Does that prove that all swans are white? Obviously not. All right, well, let's go and observe some more swans then. Let's go and observe, all the different ponds and rivers of London and see as many swans as we can. And supposing that we see nothing but white swans, it still doesn't prove my hypothesis, does it? And that shows that you can't ever prove a hypothesis to be true, no matter how much confirming evidence you collect. However, it only takes one black swan, doesn't it? It only takes one black swan to disconfirm the hypothesis. And that's why it's so important that hypotheses are falsifiable. Because hypotheses can never be proven. And if they can't be disproven either, then they're really no good at all. So hypotheses must be disprovable and falsifiable in order to be scientific. That's why hypotheses come in pairs. That's why we have a null hypothesis, because we can never prove the alternative hypothesis to be true, but what we might be able to do is disprove the null. A theory is a collection of general principles that explain observations and facts. Observations and facts. How does this work in psychology? Well, all over the world, no matter what language you speak, if you try to remember a list of words, you're going to remember the first ones and the last ones better than the ones you remember in the middle. That's a fact. Also, no matter what language you speak all over the world, acoustic similarity is very confusing in the short term, and semantic similarity is very confusing in the long term. These are facts. But the theory which explains those facts is the multi-store model of memory, which says that in actual fact in our heads we've got two unitary stores, the short-term memory and the long-term memory. So a theory is a collection of general principles and ideas that explain the observations. Right, in a minute we're going to go on to hypothesis testing, but first it is time for this week's random psychology fact.
This week's random psychology fact is, according to Helen Fisher,
there's three feelings of love:
lust,
attraction,
attachment.
Hypothesis testing is the process of testing a theory by testing the predictions that it makes. So let's think of something outside psychology for a moment. The theory of gravity. Theory of gravity predicts that if I drop that pencil, it will fall towards the centre of the earth, and indeed it does. And so the theory makes a prediction which I can test with an experiment by doing hypothesis testing, and that appears to confirm the theory of gravity. Now, note that no matter how many times I drop the pencil and it falls, I can never be 100% sure that the theory of gravity is correct, can I? Because it would only take once that I released the pencil and it just hung there without moving. That would disconfirm the theory of gravity. But that has never happened, and so we fail to disprove the null and we accept the theory of gravity as being correct. Hypothesis testing is the process of testing a theory by testing the predictions and hypotheses that it generates. And in fact, one of the hallmarks of a good theory is that it should make testable predictions. A paradigm is a shared set of assumptions about the subject matter of a discipline and the methods appropriate to its study. So let's have a think about what psychology was like pre-Wilhelm Wundt. Back in those days, psychology was a matter of subjective opinion. It was about interpretation. It was about thinking about thinking. We might unkindly call it armchair psychology. Then along came Wilhelm Wundt and said, no, psychology needs to be more objective and empirical. Observation and experiment are the best way forward for understanding the mind. And today, we have psychology as the science of mind and behaviour. So what Wilhelm Wundt did was to shift the paradigm of psychology from a non-science to a science. And that was a paradigm shift. And that's why today we think of psychology as the scientific study of mind and behaviour.